yeah, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, depending on where you're calling from. My name is Miriam Zakaria, and I am one of the project managers of the IVSA Standing Committee on One Health. And today I shall be the moderator for this section. Without wasting much of our time, I would quickly introduce Dr. Herman so we can get started. Okay, so Dr. Herman is going to be speaking about antimicrobial resistance, why veterinarians and animal owners should be concerned. He completed his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree at Utrecht University in 1988. He spent 2.5 years as manager of the large day. What?
बस અત્યારે પીપીટી નું જ કરતો હતો બધું એટલે મેં કીધું આ વિડિયો જોયો એટલે ફોન કર્યો મેં કીધું થોડું વિડિયો લાઈન થોડુંક એડવર્ટાઇઝમેન્ટ.
Okay, so sorry for that.
Sorry for that disturbance.
He spent 2.5 years as manager of a large dairy and beef herd in Costa Rica, then taught bovine head herds at Utrecht University and worked as an epidemiologist for the Dutch Animal Health Service while completing his PhD in 2001. Dr. Barkema moved to the University of Prince Edward Island. He subsequently moved to the University of Calgary, where he founded the University of Calgary Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, Department of Production Animal Health. He is currently professor in epidemiology of infectious diseases at UCVM and SERC Industrial Research Chair in infectious diseases of dairy cattle. From this biography, you realize that Dr. Herman is very vast in a lot of knowledge, and we are glad to have him today. And we hope to have a very wonderful time with him. So I would hand over to Dr. Herman so he can start his presentation, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. So do I need to put the presentation up again, or do you guys do that?
Yes, sir, you'll need to put up a presentation.
Sorry?
You'll need to put up your presentation again.
Okay. Share content. Okay, now sorry because sorry about that, but now I need to really.
Sorry, that's okay.
Yeah, no, I need to. That's no problem. I mean, this is and I hope that the file already exists. Okay, so does it? And of course, it all takes time, but here it is again. So, thank you very much all for inviting me. As I've mentioned to some people that were there before the presentation, the IVSA has a spot in my heart. I've been an active member of that when I was in vet school. That started in 1979, and I attended a lot of international meetings, and those were great. And I really hope that when we can manage this pandemic, that you all will have the same experience that I had with meeting peers from all kind of different countries and continents. That has been really enriching. And has set a tone for what I've done in the rest of my life, working in all kind of countries and meeting people from all kind of cultures. Because I really think if we all would travel a lot, then we would have not a lot of conflicts anymore in the world, because we would understand each other and accept that it is just so valuable to have people with different opinions, different beliefs, different cultures. It's really, really rich instead of that we should fight about it. So it's a pleasure being here. As Mariam said, I'm a professor at University of Calgary and I lead One Health at UCalgary and the AMR One Health Consortium. And today I'll talk about antimicrobial resistance, why veterinarians and animal owners should be concerned. We have a relatively small group today, so if you have any questions or don't get it, feel free to interrupt me. Yeah, I'm used to that, so I have 3 teenage daughters, so they interrupt me all the time. Yeah. So so this is a shared presentation. I put other people on it that at the University of Calgary work on antimicrobial resistance. We have a lot more people that work on it. And the nice thing that we have at the University of Calgary is that the vet school and the medical school are co-located. So we work very closely together in these issues. So really a One Health approach. Good. So what I first want to give some background on antimicrobial resistance, then some research done by veterinary and medical researchers at the University of Calgary, and what can we do in the livestock industry worldwide. So antimicrobial resistance is not new. Yeah? When Fleming, who discovered penicillin, he warned already in 1945 when he got the Nobel Prize that the time may come when penicillin can be bought by anyone in the shops. And unfortunately, in a lot of your countries, that is still the case. Then there is the danger that the ignorant man may easily underdose himself and by exposing his microbes to non-lethal quantities of the drug, make them resistant. Well, that sounds like the current reality. Yeah? That's unfortunately how it is the case in a lot of countries. So what we get now is that worldwide, each year 700,000 people die as a result of infections that are resistant to antimicrobials. And if you look in Canada, we have 18,000 hospitalized patients that acquire infections that are resistant to antimicrobials. So the worst place to go is a hospital in that case. You go to the hospital because you have infections, and I'm always surprised that people love to go to the emergency room instead of going to their general physician. Because the risk is so high that they will get infections. And nowadays with COVID-19, that's even more eminent, of course. So we have a lot of deaths that are related to superbugs like Clostridium difficile. And that has increased 5-fold in the past decade. Now, it costs, of course, also a lot of money, and that's only increasing. So we can look at the superbugs. You probably are all familiar with MRSA, MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Then vancomycin-resistant enterococci, extended spectrum beta-lactamase bacteria, C. diff, multidrug-resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and antibiotic-resistant Strep pneumoniae. And then if you look at antimicrobial use in a country, and then penicillin resistant percentage of Strep pneumoniae, you can draw a beautiful line through it. Yeah? And of course, this is not the typical causality study that you would think of, but really look at it. And this is not limited to lower and middle income countries. We see countries like Taiwan, France, who have a huge antibiotic use, and Portugal there in the top right corner. Of course, from a lot of your countries, we don't have data. There's not sufficient data available. So we cannot plot them in a graph like that. So that's a challenge for all of you, to be involved in studies and promote studies once you are out of vet school and get a beautiful, extremely well-paid job, I hope for you, and then you or a very interesting job like I have, where you do studies where you look at antimicrobial use and you look at what resistance is there, because this is where it starts with surveillance studies, getting good data. So the assistant director of the WHO, Keiji Fukuda, said, without urgent coordinated action by many stakeholders, the world is headed for a post-antibiotic era in which common infections and minor injuries will have been that were treatable for decades can once again kill. And that is happening already. We really need to act upon that. So what has led to antimicrobial resistance in humans? Increased use of antibiotics. In the what we would call the developed nations, or the Western European, North American, developed nations in Asia, we see that the pharmaceutical companies all talk about antimicrobial stewardship and whatever, but then in less developed countries, they dump a lot of antibiotics. And you can buy antibiotics in any pharmacy. We've done a study in Uganda, for instance, and there we found out that the drugs that farmers could not buy in the veterinary pharmacies, they just went to the human pharmacist. So we had a lot of cattle treated with chloramphenicol. So there, regulations are something, but they also need to be kept and by the authorities. And we lead a lot of outreach, that people understand, farmers, that if they do these kind of things, that then when one of their family members gets sick, there is a risk that they actually won't be treatable anymore. So a lot of salt without medical supervision. Then we've seen prophylactic use before surgery. When I was a vet student, we still would just sprinkle penicillin in the wound of a C-section in a dairy cow. Yeah, and we now know that if you do it hygienically, that is actually absolutely not necessary. Yeah, so we need research also to see whether those things are necessary. Then we see a lot of antibiotics used for viral infections. Think of a mother with a baby that has a high fever, going to a doctor. And with that high fever, most likely is a viral infection, but she demands to the doctor that she gets antibiotics. So how do you persuade the doctor and the mother not to use antibiotics? We've seen a lot, tons and tons of use against COVID-19. Well, you all will know that coronaviruses are viruses, so they are not susceptible for antibiotics. And we've seen of these practices quite a rise in antibiotic resistance in COVID-19 patients. We have a paper that is coming, that a meta-analysis on this, and it has quite increased in the COVID-19 patients. Then a spread of resistant microbes in hospitals due to lack of hygiene. Because of their busy agenda, it is sometimes difficult to persuade doctors to hand wash in between patients, to be really sterile in between patients. And then we have a lot of patients who do not complete their course of the antibiotics. So they stop halfway because they don't feel sick anymore and forget about it. Particularly men have that tendency. And I know that myself. Yeah. And then the big question is, do we get antimicrobial resistance in humans because of antibiotic use in animals. So how do we use them in livestock? So we have therapy, broilers with E. coli infection, for instance. We have prophylaxis, feedlot calves, beef cattle on arrival, egg injection with poultry, chickens, blanket dry cow treatment in dairy cows, and we can think of all kinds of prophylactic treatments. Then what we see in a lot of countries also still is growth promotion. It is, if you use low doses of antibiotics in animals, you will see that the growth is better. And that even is the case in babies, human babies. If you give them antibiotics low dose, you will see that food is better taken up and they prevents infections. However, if it is like a treatment that masks a lack of hygiene, a lack of prevention in animals. And then we have over-the-counter treatment and prescription treatment. So then we have a lot of extra label use in veterinary medicine. It is for a bit rarer diseases, it is not cost effective for a pharmaceutical company to come with trial results on certain antibiotics. So we veterinarians often prescribe certain antibiotics for diseases that they're not labeled for. So it is common practice, and it is not necessarily bad, but if farmers are going to do that, then we have a problem. So we need effective claims. So food safety is another one. So if you have extra label use, what are the residues that we get? And always remember, it is typically not from animal products that we get a transfer of antimicrobial resistance from animals to humans. It is because of water, for instance, where we get manure and urine from animals that have been treated, go in drinking water, and that drinking water is then consumed by people, because drinking water often it's not sterile. Just put some drinking water out of your tap under a microscope, do a gram stain or not even that, you will be surprised what you see in there. Sometimes little worms even. And we drink that, and that's not bad. If it's good bacteria, and a little bit of dirt doesn't hurt. But when we get resistant bacteria in it, then we have a problem. So if we then look at, and I put this here in Canada, and from a lot of countries, we don't know of antimicrobial use in animals. But we know that in Canada, a very developed country, 80% of the antibiotics used is used in animals. And that's just also, a cow happens to be about 10 to 20 times the size that a human is. So to use the right dose in a cow, you need very large doses of antibiotics, and the same for horses. Then companion animals, there is a little bit of use, but the knowledge on that is limited. Also in Canada, we don't know really well how much is used in dogs and cats. And then there's some going on crops as well. So only 18% in Canada is used for humans. So if you adjust it even for the weight, then it's still more in animals than in humans. And most of that are in antibiotic classes that are also used in humans. So, and then the environment, no one is really responsible also in Canada. Those rivers, who looks after it? The streams, is it the cities? Is it the counties? Is it the provinces? Is it the country? So there's really a lack of coordination there. So what you then get in and I am a mastitis person in background, dairy mastitis person. So if you look at staphylococci, and here we have the Staphylococcus aureus and the non-aureus staphylococci, we see that there is already in Brazil, a country with a very high use of antimicrobials, we see already a lot more phenotypic resistance, because we have two kinds of antimicrobial resistance that we measure. We have it that you see on the plate, and we have the genetic resistance where certain genes cause that. And you see that the phenotypic resistance is way higher, so in reality, in Brazil than in Canada, and also in China. So I work a lot with the China Agriculture University, and we have way more resistance there. But that's not only China. We know of other countries like Pakistan that we have a lot more resistance there as well. So we did a study with buffaloes, dairy buffaloes in Pakistan, and we looked at clinical E. coli isolates from clinical mastitis cases, and the majority were extended spectrum beta-lactamase producers. So they were resistant for those kind of drugs. That you could not use any drugs that we regularly use against bacteria, gram-negative bacteria in those E. coli, and they were all resistant for a lot of other drugs. So then is a lot of pressure from human medicine to reduce the use of antimicrobials in livestock. So they point the finger at us for that, while there is a lot to be done also in human health. But that's not our concern. It is we need to look as veterinarians on what we are going to do in animals. Let the human doctors resolve that. But the majority of antimicrobial resistance in humans comes from antimicrobial use in humans. So but we have a lot of medical organizations like WHO that point the finger at the livestock industry. And is that rightfully so or not? We know that antibiotics in animals can lead to AMR, but we don't know if we stop using antibiotics, whether that actually will reverse it. And also whether it will reverse it also in humans, in consumers. So we did a study on that, where we looked at the question, if you stop using antimicrobials or limit it, will it limit antimicrobial resistance in livestock? And then also will antimicrobial resistance go down in people? So we had some indications that would be the case. So this is a study done by the Public Health Agency of Canada, and together with the chicken producers, the poultry producers in Quebec, which is the francophone part of Canada, you saw that once they stopped using ceftiofur, that the resistance went down considerably in chicken. And they did it in Ontario also, and the same happened over there. So there are indications that at least in chicken that works. So the first question is, if we restrict an antibiotic in animals, would that lead to also a reduced antimicrobial resistance in food animals? And then the second question is, okay, if we then do that restriction in food animals, will it also lead to a reduction in human populations. And that is one, the farmers and the people that have those animals, and secondly, the public that consumes products of these farms and also drinks the water of these farms that comes from these farms. So we did a systematic review and meta-analysis, and not all of you will be familiar with it, so I will guide you a bit through that. And we did that with animal studies. And the thing is, if you do a meta-analysis, you find what we call a dog's breakfast, so a mishmash of all kind of bacteria and samples in there. Because we have feces that people look at, we have meat, we have milk, and we have all kind of groups of bacteria that they look at. So then we looked at, so what countries do we have data from? And, you see there's a lot from the US, there was not even a lot from Canada, and a lot from Northern Europe. Only one or two studies, I think, from South America. One from Nigeria, Mariam, but that's the only one in Africa. And then if you look at Asia, yes, Nidhi, I say Nidhi, Tasneem, there is one from Thailand that we could use. I see there's probably some people seeing the last names from South Korea there. So we had two studies from South Korea, two from Japan, one from Taiwan. So there's a lot of lack of data in most countries that we have, because two of the largest countries in the world, China and India, and who are also two of the largest consumers of antibiotics, are not there. And if you look at antimicrobial use, here we see India and China. And there's a lot of use here in your countries. So a lot needed, and you see that here Brazil, there's also a lot of use, and also in the US, but we had a lot of studies from the US. So if you look at the global trends in use of antimicrobials in animals, and that's just the volume, you see that it's changing. China is the biggest and is at this moment clamping down a lot on antimicrobial use. As you know, in China it's easier to clamp down on these things because of the government structure that China had, and let's not go into politics there, but yeah, it's easier to restrict things, while in India, for instance, that is way more difficult. So we see that Brazil is moving up in use quite a bit, and we see that India particularly is moving up, and also Mexico. So quite a shift happening there. So we looked at the manuscripts, and we found 175 that we could use. Most were journal articles, some abstracts. Most were cross-sectional. So what does that mean? Cross-sectional means that the antimicrobial use and the antimicrobial resistance were measured at the same time. So that means that causality is impossible to really determine. Because what could have caused a less resistant happened years before that. So ideally you need longitudinal studies to study that. So then we had a lot of different intervention, externally imposed. By government, for instance, like we see in Scandinavia, and now also in the UK. We have a lot of studies where they looked at organic farms, so farms that are not even allowed to use antibiotics versus farms that are conventional and that use antibiotics. Then we have self-reported and voluntary reduction, and those are less stringent, of course. Most is in poultry and in swine. Then some in dairy, not a lot in beef cattle. And we see hardly anything in goats, and we had one salmon study. Now, that's a bit concerning because a lot of antibiotics are used in fish. If we look at countries now like Vietnam, we know that there's a lot of use in fish, and that's fish is in the water, and that water also goes to people swim in it, drink, whatever, depending on what fish we're talking about. So we need more studies there as well. So this is then the result of it. It's a forest plot, we call it, of the use. So what you see here in this forest plot, 0 means, and this is risk difference, that there is no difference in antimicrobial resistance between the treatment group, which in this case is no antibiotics, and the control group, which is use of antibiotics. And so here you see a line with a 95% confidence interval. So we are 95% sure that the average that we have here is in this range, for this study. So Frank Astrup in 2001 did this study, and the average that he found was that there was 42% less antibiotic resistance in these in the farms, that in the animals that where no antibiotics were used anymore. So you pull all these studies together, and that we call a meta-analysis, and then you get an average, and that average was 22% with a 22% less antimicrobial resistance, and then in the animals that were not used with antibiotics than the ones that were used with antibiotics. And this is very positive, because it means that once you stop using antibiotics, we actually see a reversal. And you see how important it is to pull all these studies together, to get an average. Because the one study finds it, the other doesn't. Of course, you then need to look at those individual studies. Why these 5 studies did not find a difference, and why the other studies here did. Is that because of different circumstances, different species, different antibiotics that they looked at? So that's really important. But meta-analyses are really powerful. So 22% reduction in resistance, and all with different time periods between the restrictions and antimicrobial use. So then we looked at the different pools. We looked at different bacteria, different sample types, and we saw that it all was between 10 and 20% lower. And similar, and we see it here, green means that, so we put all these studies and all the interventions and the 6 different groups that we looked at, and we saw green meaning that there was a reduction, yellow that it was not significant, and red actually that there was more resistance when you reduced antibiotics. And that's because of chance you would get, but you see this is strong proof that once you stop using antibiotics, antibiotic resistance will decrease in animals. So and then we looked also at the genotypic resistance. Well, do we see less prevalence of these of it? And yes, we found it. And the results that we had, they were across bacterial groups, sample types, drug classes, interventions, and it was regardless of the study quality. Was randomization reported? Did they do blind analysis? All these kind of things, did not really affect the results that we saw. And also the type of intervention, we had all kind of types, restriction, growth promoter restrictions, name it. And if we looked at that, then we saw that in nearly all of them, we saw really a decrease, except in single class restriction, it was, no difference that we saw. So we really need to go for a more broad restriction of antibiotics, because what happens when you stop using a single class of antibiotics, farmers are not stupid. Yeah, they will just go to another antibiotic, and use that in their animals. So you don't see a real reduction there. So you need to really clamp down on more antibiotics. So antibiotic-free practices were associated with 17% reduction. Less prohibitive practices had a similar effect. Single use didn't work, and growth promoter bans were very effective. And that's also because typically those are the first ones that are implemented. That is what organizations do. And highly targeted restrictions, unlikely, they probably didn't have an effect. So if you then go to the human studies, where the antimicrobial use restrictions looked at antimicrobial resistance in people. Now we saw the same kind of percentage there as we saw in animals, and there was no study that reported something here. Yeah, they all were on this side. Yeah, we're really showing also reduction in humans. But then if you split it up and you look at farm workers and non-farm workers, we saw a bigger restriction of less antimicrobial resistance in the farm workers. And that made sense, because they're closer to the animals. So it makes sense that they get less antimicrobial resistance. But still we saw something quite a bit, 10% about, in the public that uses these products from these farms. But of course, the public, there's a dilution effect, because they will still drink water that comes from other farms. They won't only use organic products if they but there's still an effect. So the conclusions, of course, there was a small number of studies, but the mechanisms that are indirect, and the effect was stronger in farm workers, but it was also true in all kind of studies. Type of intervention, let's not look too much. There were unintended consequences. So if you stop, for instance, growth promotion or blanket dry cow treatment for mastitis, you also need to look at whether there are unintended consequences. Do you get more mastitis, or do you get more diarrhea or less growth? And there was these studies were nearly all in developed countries. Yeah, countries that have a lot of experience and knowledge on working with animals. In less developed countries, it will be very, very difficult sometimes to put these practices in place. But there were small effects on animal health. So we saw indeed that there was a reduction in antimicrobial resistance, and also in animals and in humans. If you want to look at these manuscripts, you can find them. We published 4 of them, and we're still working on these kind of things a lot. Yeah, in very good journals, actually. So where do we go from here? Yeah. Should we, because that's what people always say, we should put more research and development money in development of new antimicrobials. However, that will be difficult. Should we phase out the use of antimicrobials in animals? Or do we need to tell those human doctors that they need to get their act together and first make sure that they do something about it? Yeah. So if we then look in our situation, and also in human situation, it is not different persuading a children's doctor, a pediatrician, that they should use less antibiotics than talking with a veterinarian. Yeah? But we need surveillance data to prove what we are doing, that is based on something. We need to know how much antibiotics are used in what animals. We need to know what resistance levels are in animals and in humans. And then we need stewardship practices, and we all need to work together. A One Health approach towards this problem. And the best way to reduce the use of antimicrobials is prevent infections in animals. Yeah, so work really on reduction of diseases, infectious diseases in animals. That's where it all starts. That's where we veterinarians should work on. And of course we need research and innovation, but there is a lot of knowledge already. Yeah, and a big one is that we need to work on where we have knowledge is really look at the prescriptions with that veterinarians and farmers do. What do they use? There is a void in antimicrobial development. The last one we had was from nearly 20 years ago. So we really need to work on antimicrobial development. However, it is not really cost effective for pharmaceutical industries. Because if you look at what it costs to develop a new drug, it's in the billions. And what happens if you have a new class of antimicrobials? It will be shelved, and it will be only used in people that are resistant to, that have infections that are resistant to all kind of other antibiotics. So it is not cost effective for these antimicrobial industries, for these pharmaceutical industries to develop new ones. It costs them a lot of money and there's no payback. So the system there needs to change. So then what the World Health Organization recommends is stop using antibiotics to prevent disease without a diagnosis. Yeah, it's all nice, but when you are in a certain countries and there is no veterinary infrastructure, this is really, really difficult. So we need a veterinary infrastructure and also human health infrastructure in a lot of countries. Then healthy animals should only receive antibiotics to prevent disease if it has been diagnosed in other animals in the same herd. And this is for poultry, swine, goats, animals that are kept in a flock. And then they also say we should reduce the use of all classes of medical important antibiotics in food-producing countries. And that's an important one. We clamped down in Western Europe, North America on really what we call the class 1 and class 2 antibiotics, the antibiotics that are important for human health. But then when I travel to countries that have less of a restriction, I see all these antibiotics on the shelf in farms. And I see them on the shelf in the veterinary pharmacies. So we need to work on doing that, on restricting that, which is very difficult because you need infrastructure to do so. And also you need willingness to do so. So we need to look at, monensin, for instance, is an antibiotic that can be used. It's only used in animals. But if you have 70 or fewer, for instance, we really have a problem in not only in animals but also in humans that should be restricted to use in humans. So also the FAO, they say phase out prophylactic use of antibiotics in farm animals. And they want to ban these third and fourth generation cephalosporins, for instance, which are class 1 and 2 antibiotics in farm animals. And all prophylactic and off-label use in farm animals of new antibiotics licensed, to keep those so that no new resistance will occur. But again, that is for pharmaceutical industries very difficult because they want to earn money. And they put money into development of these antimicrobials. So they want to switch to more extensive production systems. Yeah, that's all nice, but we also need protein for our consumers. And in a lot of the countries that you live in, we need protein, for instance, from chickens. And we cannot just go back to chickens that roam around on a farm. We need protein for it. We see a lot of movement of people going to cities, for instance, and we need that protein. So the recommendations that are made for developed countries are often not applicable and not feasible in lower and middle income countries. And we need to look at how to apply that. Reducing stress, all nice, but yes, important, but how do you do that? Avoiding mixing of animals, yes, all in, all out is the best. Not always possible, particularly not if you have in dairy. I always say diseases are bought and paid for. Animals are bought, and with those you buy diseases in. So diseases are bought and paid for. So we should be careful with buying animals. Good weaning practices, keeping stocking densities low, that's all nice, but if you have a highly populated country, you cannot have large farms with lower stocking density. So we need to work with that. Then transport should be reduced because animals get stress, and we see that also in Canada from the cow-calf herds to the feedlots. All these calves need to be treated with antibiotics after arrival, otherwise they just all get pneumonia and a lot of them die. And so we should reduce journey times and have the people have chains where the animals don't have to travel a lot. And of course, there's a lot of research needed on natural robustness and disease resistance. So a big concern that I have is that recommendations to livestock farming in developed countries don't work in the developing ones. And we need to help lower and middle income countries to apply these restrictions. Because we see that in the lower and middle income countries, the antimicrobial resistance levels are way higher than in what I would say the more developed countries. So, and then we see that WHO, FAO, and OIE are very siloed. They don't work together. It starts now, but it's very difficult for them to think across their traditional limits. And then what we see in most countries, that government, veterinary organizations, livestock industry, medical organizations, and pharma are working separately on this issue. How often do you see, for instance, that you guys, veterinary students, have the same classes with medical students or pharma students? It hardly ever happens. So you don't know each other. There is no trust. The medical students think that they're way better than we veterinarians are, while typically it's more difficult to get into a veterinary school than in a medical school. Yeah. So you guys are smarter than the medical students typically. Yeah. But it is very difficult to get them together. So you need to work together to really approach this together. But even in North America, you get all kind of provinces and states that work separately. So in developed countries, the pharmaceutical industries are cooperative and talk about antimicrobial stewardship, and then they dump the drugs in the lower and middle income countries. Yeah, that is really, really bad. So we need to act. Yeah, yes, and what you sometimes hear, oh, it always has been there, and resistance to penicillin was already there before it was discovered. Doesn't matter. We have a problem. Yeah? We have a problem in humans. We have a problem in animals. We need to do something. We need to be proactive. Yeah? And the biggest one is preventing infections. So teaching our farmers measures so that the animals won't get sick and that they don't need blanket treatments with antibiotics to prevent infections. And because we really, hey, I hope nobody is tweeting that I think that veterinary students are better than medical students. I see, because then I will get into a lot of trouble, but okay, I said it. I don't say they're better. Huh? It's difficult to get in there, more difficult to get in there. Good. So therapeutic use is essential for animal welfare. If an animal gets sick, we as veterinarians should be able to use antibiotics, and we want to keep that right. Yeah, and to do that, we need to be proactive. And all together, we should develop a target reduction in the use of antimicrobials. So, guiding principle is that a lot of the disease can be prevented by good husbandry rather than prophylactic use of antimicrobials. We're moving in Canada towards selective treatment with antibiotics. And if a commodity cannot keep their animals healthy without routine use, we should critically look at it, the reasons, and make changes. So we should, in developed countries, ban the use of antimicrobials essential for human health, and a lot of things here for the developed livestock industry. As some of your countries that you work in are very developed, they can do that. Yeah, and then make clear and quantitative goals to reduce the overall use. And it is important that developed countries help the countries that are less developed. Infections don't stop at borders. Yeah, we have seen that with COVID. I am ashamed of what the developed countries have done with vaccinations and just let the less developed countries be on their own. That is the worst we can do in the world. Yeah? We really need to work together on these issues, yeah, and help each other with this. And so that's for COVID, but also for antimicrobial use and resistance. So we need to work together, yeah, and also within countries, and do this for every commodity: dairy, beef, poultry, swine, name it. So work together is the key word in this, in One Health. And it happens in a lot of countries already. So there are examples. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Scandinavia is doing this for ages. Conventional farms can learn from the good organic farms, and we can use their protocols. So that is what I have. So just a shameless plug-in here. So I work at One Health at U Calgary. Look at our websites. If One Health at U Calgary and the AMR One Health Consortium, we will find a lot of information. We have 2 LinkedIn pages with a lot of followers. And one thing to remember, in the fall, we will have a seminar series again on antimicrobial resistance with a One Health background, with 24 lectures that are by donation only. Yeah. Thank you, Suhai Batu. And so we will now, we targeted Africa and Latin America in the last one with the time zones. We are looking now in doing it at a time that it will be also more available for people in Asia. Yeah, so we're thinking of using the morning in North America so that people in Asia can also use it, look at it. So we have great presenters in it. So it is, yeah, I love it. And so you can do it free of cost. Of course, we love donation, particularly from people from the most richer country. I don't expect that you guys will have a lot of money. But so, and then we'll also have a One Health Summer Institute this summer of 2 weeks. And that is, and we will have also sponsorship from organizations that we can bring you over to it. It won't be for a lot of people, but there will be some that we can bring over. And the focus is in this one is on agriculture and on water. So great way to do a trip to Canada and to come to this beautiful part of the world. So, and yeah, are there any questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Herman. That was a very wonderful presentation. I learned a lot of things and some things that I haven't known before. We'll take some questions now. And just 1 second, please. Let me see. Okay, so somebody asked that if developing a new antibiotics is so expensive, would it be better to put that research money into alternative and supportive therapies?
Yeah. Now, alternative therapies, we see, then you think about therapies. We have so many alternative practices and therapies available to us that have never, ever been tested. So, and so if you go to human drugstores or pharmacies, there are all kind of claims on things that probiotics, prebiotics, and name it, all kind of drugs that have never, ever, ever been tested. Yeah, so I think it's up to those companies to do clinical trials first to prove that it really works. And that has not happened. I would love to put that money more into preventing infectious diseases. Yeah? And one good way of doing this is vaccination. Yeah? But another one is husbandry. So we need vaccinations for good vaccines for diseases in animals, which is easier for viruses than for bacteria. But with viruses, we get a lot of secondary bacterial infections, and because of that, antimicrobial use. So, but the governments need to sit together, and you guys need to work with human doctors and governments and pharmacists and farmers all together to reduce the use of antimicrobials, because it's scary what I see in some of your countries.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Then, and we have another question. What is stopping us from banning antibiotic use completely, since there are evidence from studies as well?
So banning antimicrobials in people?
Yeah, or generally, just banning it generally.
I mean, restricting it. So it is the will to do so. So we really need people are not aware. There is not a lot or not enough awareness of that antimicrobial resistance is the next pandemic, the next disease that we see. People are thinking about COVID all the time, and so what we, I sometimes hope that a famous hockey player will get a resistant infection and is going to be on the news all the time to talk about it. Yeah, because that would increase the awareness of people. We see more and more awareness, but it's difficult to get that awareness in people. So and then we need a regulatory system that is maintained in a lot of countries. You can have all kind of laws, but if nobody looks after that these laws are kept, it just won't happen. Yeah, and so that is really, really difficult. So we need awareness and we need a will to less use antimicrobials. And human doctors need to learn about it also. And we need to know more in how to motivate these people to not use it anymore. And people always think that other people are motivated by money. It's often not the case. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions. And remember, there are no stupid questions, only stupid answers sometimes. So.
Okay, somebody said that in our country, they use antibiotics most times without performing sensitivity tests. So how can that kind of problem be addressed and prevented?
Yeah, so we need, so infrastructure can be a problem in a lot of countries. Yeah. So how do you give farmers and even human doctors the opportunity to get these isolates being tested or even cultured and then being tested in laboratories? So we need infrastructure. It needs to become a priority. Yeah, and particularly if a country is war-torn, yeah, or has a lot of terrorism or whatever, it is very, very, very difficult in certain parts of the country to have that infrastructure. So stable government with are important, and that put a lot of money in infrastructure so that veterinary practices can have those antimicrobial resistance testing. But then farmers are often living far from these practices, and if you have to walk to a practice for a day or whatever to deliver a sample, well, that ain't gonna happen. Yeah, so that is one of the things. So availability and infrastructure are really important, and then we need to teach our veterinarians to do these kind of things hygienically, and then they do it, but the results typically are only back there a day after or more. Yeah. So then how they need to learn to be able to contact these farmers to do that. And there we have another infrastructure, a communication infrastructure that we need there. So that's sometimes, and if you are in Japan, it's no problem, or in South Korea, but in some other countries, it's very difficult to get that all done.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. Then just like a question anyway. In you mentioned how like eradicating or reducing the use of prophylactic treatments would kind of like help, but So some farmers, like let's say a poultry farmer that's been practicing for like several years, and he has gotten so used to, like in my country now, some people have like this poultry schedule. They follow, like maybe first week they give antibiotics, second week they give anticoccidial drugs, and they like how can we go about like convincing them that they do not need to use all that before they are able to do well?
Yeah, and that's very difficult, huh? Because also you're from Nigeria, there is access to human pharmacies to buy those drugs often. Yeah? And that's in a lot of other countries. Yeah? So it is, they need to see the importance, and they also need to see that there are drugs available that are as good as the drugs that they have, that should be used, and that should not be more expensive than the other drugs. So that is one thing. They we have very good. We just published a manuscript in Journal of Dairy Science last year, and we showed that you don't need those first and second class drugs, those drugs that we want to use in humans for mastitis in dairy cattle and in buffaloes. It's absolutely not necessary to use those. But so ceftiofur, which is so often used in dairy cattle, is actually absolutely not necessary, and there's a high resistant percentage already. So, we need to also clamp down. There's laws necessary. We need to talk with pharmaceutical industries, telling them, guys, it's all nice that in developing countries you have your mouth full of antimicrobial stewardship, but prove that also in the lower and middle income countries, and don't dump your antimicrobials there. Because if you see how much is used, it's scary. Yeah? And how can we, and they just think, if some farmers, I use double the dose, that it has a double effect. Yeah, and or even more, and that's just not the case. Yeah. So there is a lot of education, knowledge, outreach necessary. And for that, we also need the people, the veterinarians in governments, not to only be in their office or laboratory building. We need them to be familiar with the people in the field. Yeah, so they need to travel and work with the people, which is, you need infrastructure for that. We need incentives to do so, and that is really, really difficult. But you're the next generation. You need to work on those things, and there's a lot of good that you can do. Yeah? Be idealistic, yeah? and also it is a lot of fun. Yeah, to do so, to work with farmers and veterinarians in the field, it is so much fun. I don't do it a lot anymore right now, but because I have other things on my mind, but it is so much fun to do so.
All right, thank you so much. So, since there aren't any more questions, we'll be coming towards the end of this session. Thank you so much, Dr. Herman, for this wonderful session that we had today. And I would like to hand over to Anissa to give a closing remark. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being with all of you, and I hope to see you again in North America, Asia, Africa, wherever we will be. Yeah? I hope we can get back to that in the future. Have a great night.
Yes, Dr. Herman, if you recognize me, I'm the one who contacting you via email, and I apologize for like all the miscommunication, and I'm glad we have you here, and I feel like very enjoying your lecture. And yes, as what you said, like I hope to meet you like in anyway we can do. Looking forward to more collaborations, Doctor. Have a nice day.
Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to a lot of collaborations with you, all of you. Yeah, with a lot of your countries already have collaborations, and yeah, we look at establishing more. It's time and sometimes funding that is the limit. Yeah, great. Okay.
Well, I would say, Nidhi, are you saying something? Sorry. We cannot hear your voice, unfortunately.
There's a rain coming down. Monsoon season, or what is it somewhere? Oh no.
Sorry,
No, it was
Doctor.
not. Sorry, Nidhi?
Yeah, Nidhi. I
Sorry.
think.
Hello, can you hear?
Sorry?
Tell me you can hear me.
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear
I
you.
can hear you now.
Okay. So, hi, doctor. This is Nidhi Khonekar, the Asia Regional Representative, and I'm so glad you accepted our invitation to be here. I had contacted you, I think, 2 or 3 months back for
Yeah.
a session. I'm so happy that I can finally have you here and share your inputs on AMR. So thank you once again, and sorry if from our end we've done if there was any miscommunication.
That's geez. You know, that is. I always say I am perfect, but I cannot expect that of everybody. That's Dutch humor. But so we all make mistakes, and what counts is how we are there at the end. Yeah. So no problem whatsoever with that. Great. Okay, then I'm going to my wife and children, and we'll have a coffee. Yeah, and because it's the morning. Okay, I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, doctor.
Bye-bye, Doctor.
Bye.
Have a nice day.